Fala galera, estamos ao vivo, começando mais um Drops Debate, seu programa de debates e discussões aqui no Drops de jogos, entrevistas. É o nosso programa Coringa, né, gente? A gente faz muita coisa com o Drops Debate. A gente vai inaugurar agora uma nova fase do programa, gente, em que eu vou retransmitir algumas lives da GDC, de eventos famosos, de palestras famosas, para a gente discutir um pouco sobre desenvolvimento de jogos. Também é uma certa forma de eu também traduzir esse conteúdo para vocês e a gente poder acompanhar, comentar e também discutir um pouco o que está sendo falado. São palestras em inglês, tem algumas palestras em português também a gente vai rodar. Tem muitas informações importantes que a gente vai passar para vocês, que são aqui o nosso público que é formado majoritariamente por desenvolvedores de jogos. Por isso é muito importante que vocês curtam, que vocês compartilhem, que vocês mandem perguntas. Ó, vou botar aqui no chat, ó. Mandem perguntas, curtam, compartilhem, usem a hashtag Drops de Jogos e ajudem no crowdfunding. Aí eu vou deixar o endereço aqui para vocês. Quem puder contribuir, eu agradeço muito para a gente poder continuar fazendo esse trabalho necessário aqui para vocês e todo mundo ficar acompanhando. Gente, a gente vai retransmitir hoje uma palestra da GDC do John Romero, dele falando sobre os primeiros anos da própria id Software. Eu vou pegar aqui direitinho a palestra para a gente entender, a gente pensar um pouco juntos e a gente também justamente acompanhar todas as informações relevantes para vocês entenderem direitinho. John Romero é o criador do jogo Doom, nós entrevistamos ele em dezembro de 2022 e ele fez essa palestra aqui interessantíssima lá na id Software, uma palestra que teve 138 mil visualizações, não é tanta visualização. Aliás, a GDC é um evento que merece mais carinho das pessoas que acompanham, porque é o principal evento para desenvolvedores de jogos. Então é fundamental a gente também desenvolver um pouco de conteúdo em cima dessas lives. Vamos vir juntos aqui essa palestra para a gente entender juntos. São 56 minutos, eu vou parar em alguns tópicos para traduzir e também conversar um pouco sobre o que ele está falando.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the talk, id Software's Early Days, as told by me.
Lembrando que a id Software não é só do John Romero, tem um camarada chamado John Carmack, que inclusive saiu da Oculus, da Meta, na verdade, que era a empresa responsável pelo Facebook. Então tem muita gente além do John Romero. O John Romero é o cara que dá tanto a programação quanto a arte para o jogo que é o Doom, né? O Doom criou o jogo de tiro em primeira pessoa, e o John Romero é o artista que dá vida a esse design que a gente pode acompanhar. Eu coloquei legendas em português, então vocês vão poder entender mais ou menos o que ele está falando, mas a gente vai parar para discutir alguns pontos.
So welcome everybody, I'm John Romero, I'm co-founder of id Software, and I'm going to take you on a journey back to the beginning of id Software. Are you ready to be entertained? Everybody needs some entertainment today, all right? Okay, so I realize that some of what I'm about to say may sound insane, but we were in our 20s, and when we started it, we didn't know that there were any limits. So I grew up in a wonderful small town in Northern California named Rockland. The population was only 6,000. In the 70s, I was massively addicted to spending loads of time in cold, dark arcades, playing all the games there, and I got really good at playing them. In 1979, before anyone really had a computer at their house, including me, I went to the local college when I was 11, and I started learning BASIC from the college students. I just went up to them and I just asked them what the words in their listings were, and I wrote them all down on paper, and I started experimenting with them on the HP 9000 mainframe there. I was mostly interested in just making and playing games.
Bom, como eram os computadores nos primórdios, hein, gente? Olha como era que era difícil ter um computador desse tipo e como o Romero ele se sente privilegiado pela essa cultura comunitária, na verdade.
To keep me at home, my parents got an Apple II Plus. I was done going outside after that. I spent all my time programming games on that computer. A few years and 20 Apple II games later, and I finally learned 6502 assembly language from this book. It was the language that all fast arcade games were written in back in the 80s. Then I could really make 80s games like this, except that they kind of look like this on a computer. So not quite arcade games, but home computer games, which were on the Apple II. And let's just say the Apple II was my personal home arcade, as well as 1 million other Apple owners back then. When I was a sophomore in high school, I did some programming for the Air Force when I was 15 years old. I can't tell you what I was programming, though. It's classified. After high school, I kept making games. And by 1987, I was finally working at one of my favorite companies in the industry, which was Origin Systems. My first job was porting 2400 AD from the Apple II to the Commodore 64. By this time, in 1987, 1988, I'd made 74 games and 3 previous startup companies. Capital Ideas Software on top, Inside Out Software, where I ported Might and Magic 2 from the Apple II to the Commodore 64, and Ideas from the Deep, and I was 21 years old. So then I went to work at a company named Sofdisk at the start of 1989.
Só para vocês terem uma ideia, gente, a carreira do Romero nessa época, que ele não fazia sucesso, foi tão extensa que o Doom, que foi o maior sucesso comercial dele até os anos 2000 e certamente o jogo mais influente que ele fez, foi o 90º jogo dele. Então ele fez 89 jogos até chegar no Doom e ele passou pela Sofdisk.
I learned how to program a DOS PC there, and I made a small game or a utility per month for a whole year. Then I created a game product called Gamer's Edge at Sofdisk, and I had to hire a very small team of developers to make games. So I hired John Carmack and Adrian Carmack, not related, into the department for programming.
Não são parentes, tá, gente? Não são irmãos. O Adrian Carmack e o John Carmack são pessoas de famílias diferentes.
In an art. And then Tom Hall came in at night to help us out since he was already at Sofdisk and he loved making games. So this was the first time in 10 years that any of us had worked with one other person or more on any game after making them alone, right, for a decade each, and it was incredible getting together finally on a team. So while creating our first game together, Slordax, John Carmack discovered the smooth scrolling trick on the PC. So Tom and John stayed up until 5 a.m. and they made a little demo called Dangerous Dave and Copyright Infringement. And so they put a disc on my desk. The next day I came in, I saw the disc, I ran the demo, and I watched the screen scroll smoothly, pixel by pixel. And it was a massive eureka moment for me. It was like a bolt of lightning hit me, and I'll elaborate on why that was in a moment. But id Software was born that instant on September 20th of 1990. So one thing led to another, and we spent a whole week putting together a demo of Super Mario 3 for Nintendo. We did this after work. And Nintendo liked it, but they decided not to publish it because they decided to only publish their games on their own NES platform back then, which was a smart move. So no problem. We just used the tech for a different game, which was the Commander Keen trilogy. So why would a side-scroller be a huge hit on PCs in 1990? Well, it was because no games on the PC had scrolled smoothly per pixel. You know, the PC had been out since August of 1981, and in 9 years, no one had figured out how to make smooth scrolling pixel by pixel like a Nintendo until the Dangerous Dave and Copyright Infringement demo, which led to Commander Keen. Does anyone remember the original Duke Nukem game? All right. It scrolled by in chunks of 8 pixels like other games of that era, and the reason why it scrolled with any speed is because I taught Todd Replogle how to do it while he was coding Dark Ages, and he made the game that he made right before Duke Nukem. So the Commander Keen trilogy provided the start of the company, id Software, and we made these 3 games in 3 months, from September 20th to December 14th in 1990. So Commander Keen was a massive hit for us, and it was so popular that people cosplayed as Keen for years at events, even today. And Commander Keen pioneered the creation of game engines. So we designed the game as an engine that operated on different data for different games. It was the only way to get the trilogy done so quickly. In fact, in 1991, when we were working on Keen 4, we started licensing the engine for the first time, so it was the beginning of the modern engine licensing business. Development on our games went very smoothly and quickly because we stuck to some core principles that are important even today. So through this talk, I'm going to highlight some of our core principles. I'd like to highlight something else right now, namely this photo. Has anyone seen this photo before? So
Só para vocês entenderem o que ele está falando, quando ele estava na Soft Disk, ele recrutou essas 3 pessoas, o Adrian Carmack, o John Carmack e o Tom Hall, criou a id Software, e eles fizeram Commander Keen, que foi um fenômeno, que foi um jogo que foi pioneiro na questão das engines, dos motores gráficos para criar jogos. Então você vê nessa fala do Romero, no finalzinho dos anos 80 e no começo dos anos 90, a sementinha que ele vai dar depois no Doom, para criar aquele jogo que pode ser configurado, os estágios dele podem ser devidamente configurados. Então, é dessa maneira que ele desenvolve, ele nunca teve esse interesse de empresas muito grandes como a Nintendo, que muitas vezes processam as pessoas por quebra de direitos autorais. A ideia do John Romero sempre foi abrir a propriedade intelectual também para os jogadores participarem. É uma cultura meio hacking, né, que a gente pode acompanhar, embora ele seja um empresário do setor, embora ele tenha claramente interesses comerciais.
Not in Europe. It's a picture of John and I at the lake house in Shreveport, Louisiana, where we started id Software. So the funny thing is that people have asked me for years what was in this picture. So I analyzed it recently, and here's what you see. So this is John, me and John, in early September of 1990. We were working on the Super Mario 3 demo that we planned on sending to Nintendo.
E eles jogavam D&D, tá, gente? Eles eram RPGistas. É o que tá na tela aí indicando.
So we both worked on this huge Dungeons and Dragons table that John had. We used to play D&D on the weekends, and those sessions led to ideas for future games like Doom and Quake. So this is John and me. Tom Hall took the photo. We were working on the Super Mario 3 demo that we planned on sending to Nintendo, and the computers were brought home from work on the weekends. So this pic was taken on a Saturday or a Sunday. On top of the monitor is one of those old Intel reflective astronaut plushies from a long time ago. And on my left is my notepad, which was a task list of bugs to fix. And this is our high-level task list of what had to get done to finish the demo. There wasn't really anything online back then. There was no online, really. This is Tom Hall's area where he was doing all the graphics for the demo. He recorded gameplay on a VCR, then he played it back and he paused the action so he could duplicate the tiles exactly in Deluxe Paint 2, if anyone remembers that. The TV set had a 13-channel selector on it, and it was connected by an RF modulator, so it was very old school. So id Software was formally founded on February 1st of 1991, and we made 12 games that year.
Muito jogo, gente. Eles faziam... Tem o Hover Tank, tem muitos jogos em primeira pessoa que vão ser aí os jogos pais do Doom.
Shadow Knights, Dangerous Dave in the Haunted Mansion, Rescue Rover, Hover Tank, blah, 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 blah. Tons of games. We actually took 2 months per game, but we made 2 games simultaneously. So this was due to basically having 10 years of intense game development experience prior. But it's also due to the first principle that we had, which was no prototypes. Just make the game, polish as you go, and don't depend on polish happening later. So always maintain constantly shippable code. This is how we made so many games so quickly. We had the whole game designed in our heads. We just needed to quantify what needed to be done and then went about working on it until the game was finished. There were no prototypes for our games.
Tem uma lição importante para os desenvolvedores nesse ponto da palestra dele na GDC. Ele não defende, pelo menos não defendia quando ele trabalhava na id Software, por isso que eles fizeram vários jogos, mais de 10 jogos, ele não defendia o refinamento e a pós-produção dele. Você fazia o jogo sem protótipos, você fazia o jogo, entregava, se ele não estava funcionando tão bem, você usa o conhecimento que você adquiriu nesse jogo e já parte para um próximo. Isso é uma dica preciosa para qualquer indie que John Romero já fazia em 1991. Faça vários jogos, faça, erre muito, porque são os erros que vão ensinar você depois com os jogos que se tornarão os verdadeiros sucessos. Ele tem uma linha de produção muito mais nesse sentido.
So we just made them. And remember, we did have a small team of 4 people that could do this, and large teams definitely require more planning. So time for a quick story. One day, it rained really hard, and Cross Lake in Louisiana rose, and it was flooding everywhere, and I needed to get to work. We were furiously working away on our games, and I had to get back into it. And I just took a shower and everything, and went down the road in the car, and then I saw this. The whole road was flooded. Well, basically, I waded through the huge flood with water snakes in Louisiana all the way to the house, and I took another shower, and I could start coding. And this was because we were all so excited to be making our own games, 24/7 basically. Also note that during this time, during this year that we made 12 games, we also moved id Software from Louisiana to Wisconsin, to Madison, Wisconsin, and that takes a lot of time out of making games. But we couldn't afford to have anything go wrong while making our games at such a pace, and so we created another principle that kept us developing quickly. It's incredibly important that your game can always be run by your team. So bulletproof your engine by providing defaults on load failure. So if you have 100 people on your team trying to develop a game that will not run, you're paying for 100 people to sit around and wait for it to get fixed. So we recognize the importance of keeping the game always playable, and we decided to bulletproof our engine by making all input into the game solid. So game engines typically fail because they're trying to load bad, corrupted, or non-existent data. So checking for this and providing a default for a failure case will keep the game running, and it'll quickly show you what's missing. So if you fail to load a sprite into the engine, just show bagel. Theme song is not working or loading up, play something obviously wrong for the game, like, I don't know, heavy metal or something. Missing a sound effect, same thing, just play something very obnoxious. So after 1991, id Software's first stage of company development was complete, and another important principle was in effect. Keep your code absolutely simple. Keep looking at your functions and figure out how you can simplify even further.
Olha, uma cultura de empresa muito interessante. Eles sempre buscam pela simplicidade na programação, pela simplicidade no próprio design, que possa ser simplificado depois que o jogo é concluído. Isso é um pensamento bem, jornalisticamente é muito interessante, que eu falo de outro terreno, que é o da comunicação, mas na matemática também faz todo sentido. Se você quer que uma ideia realmente funcione muito bem, você precisa que ela seja extremamente simples. Essas palestras da GDC são muito boas por isso, gente. Elas trazem desses grandes nomes da indústria inúmeras lições para a gente, para vocês que trabalham com desenvolvimento e para mim que cobre esse setor. É muito bom você ver o John Romero trazendo uma história de bastidor aí interessantíssima. O cara que criou a expressão deathmatch, o cara que realmente conhece muito de jogos de tiro, multiplayer e jogos de computador. Ele pegou um período que ainda estava nascente e amadureceu.
So we wrote,
sendo politicamente correto, inclusive,
all of the games that we made, up to and including Quake, in plain C, no C++. Not saying that you shouldn't be using C++. So okay, stage 2 was about to begin. In August of 1991, we decided to move to Madison, Wisconsin. Tom Hall and I visited at that time in August, and we found it to be really nice because Tom Hall used to live there while he was in college. So we moved all 4 of us there, and we continued working on our games. Only 4 months later, we were found dead in the snow, victims of Wisconsin's brutal winters that we did not research. So the moral of the story is do your research. We knew how to program an assembly language, but not how to ask Tom Hall, hey, what are winters like up here? So after 6 months of cold hell, we moved to Texas. So new principle, great tools help make great games. Spend as much time on tools as possible. I wrote a tile editor in 1991 named TED, for tile editor. TED was used for 33 shipped retail games, several of which were 3D games even, like Hover Tank, Catacombs 3D, Wolfenstein 3D, Spear of Destiny, Rise of the Triad, Corridor 7, etc. So it was January 1992. We decided to go all 3D based on Catacombs 3D's promise that we had just made it a couple months ago. So it looked cool, it just didn't play very cool. So in Wolfenstein 3D, it took us 4 months of development time to make Wolfenstein and launch the shareware version.
Esse jogo aqui é o pai do Doom, tá, gente? Wolfenstein 3D.
One episode of...
Um jogo, inclusive, você mata nazistas.
One episode of levels. It took 2 more months to finish all 6 episodes of the game, plus the hint book. And then the first month, the game sold 4,000 copies, all priced at $60 each.
Ó, Wolfenstein 3D no lançamento vendeu 4.000 cópias a $60 cada. Vou fazer uma conta de padeiro aqui, ó. 4.000 vezes 60. Ele teve $240 mil já de ganho, de receita com esse primeiro jogo. É um exemplo para os desenvolvedores aí que estão começando, gente, para vocês pensarem em números. Lembrando, ele já tinha feito 1 década de jogos até chegar nesse montante, tá, gente? Então, essas coisas dão muito trabalho. Tem algumas pessoas que estouram. Hoje em dia, a gente está vivendo o tempo das redes sociais, tem muita gente que viraliza e consegue capitalizar em cima disso, mas o Romero não vivia nisso. Os jogos dele eram feitos, inclusive, para disquete.
So that was really pretty cool for us. Spear of Destiny took 2 months. It's a prequel to Wolfenstein 3D, and it was retail only. So we got 2 games done that year. Soon after,
ele fez uma prequel do Wolfenstein.
Tom Hall traveled to Kentucky to work for a couple months on Wolfenstein VR. Yes, this was 1992 VR.
Olha uma coisa interessante. O que ele fala aqui, ó.
Tom Hall traveled to Kentucky.
O Tom Hall, antes mesmo do próprio John Carmack, já trabalhava nos anos 90 com realidade virtual, gente. Então, isso já era pensado há muito tempo. Tinha um motor gráfico da Nintendo também, que eles usaram em Star Fox, que já imaginava o 3D. Então, a jogabilidade 2D já estava sendo, aos poucos, dos 8 dos 16 bits, estava sendo superada.
Kentucky to work for a couple months on Wolfenstein VR. Yes, this was 1992 VR. Back in the days of Commander Keen, I had discovered a small 3-person game company called Raven Software in Madison, Wisconsin. I called them up, we went over, we introduced ourselves, and flash forward 7 months later, and we did a little work with them by modifying the Wolfenstein 3D engine and licensing it to them for a game called Shadowcaster, if anybody remembers this game. It was released in 93. Shadowcaster's tech improvements were sloping floors, lighting, and fog. This engine looked slightly better than Wolfenstein 3D, but it just wasn't good enough for our next game. So John Carmack, he spent some months thinking about how more advanced the new engine should be for the game that we decided to call Doom. Based on the rapid development of our previous games, we came up with another important principle.
O desenvolvimento de Doom, olha que bacana, gente. Eles aprenderam a desenvolver névoa, jogos 3D, armas, muita coisa interessante dessa contracultura dos anos 90. E aí eles chegaram finalmente em Doom, que sairia em 93.
We are our own best testing team, and we should never allow anyone else to experience bugs or see the game crash. Don't waste other people's time. Test thoroughly before checking in your code. No throwing it over the fence for testers to find and put a bug in a database and then fix it later. It's a wasteful cycle. So after 1992, id Software's second stage of company development was complete, along with another principle. As soon as you see a bug, you fix it. Do not continue on. If you don't fix your bugs, your new code will be built on a buggy code base and ensure an unstable foundation.
Mais uma base muito interessante. Assim que você vê um bug de um jogo, conserte-o, porque o seu jogo pode servir de base para outras construções. E se ele for bugado, se ele tiver problemas técnicos, ele vai apresentar esses problemas futuramente.
If you check in buggy code, someone will be writing code based on your bad code, and you can just imagine how much waste that creates. Okay, so the ideas for Doom came from our D&D campaign, which was full of demons.
Olha aí, a ideia de Doom veio da onde? De Dungeons and Dragons, gente. Eles eram um grupão de nerds, assim como eu e você, que estamos acompanhando essa live agora.
We also love the movies Evil Dead and Aliens. So Doom's design was just a mashup of these ideas. And at the beginning of Doom's development, we created a new core principle. Use a superior development system than your target to develop your game. So before Doom, we were making games for DOS while developing on DOS computers. And we knew that we could do better if we used more powerful computers and a more advanced operating system to develop our games. So we developed Doom on Next Step workstations. So they're far superior to DOS. Next Step.
O Next, para quem não lembra, é uma plataforma que o Steve Jobs acho que trabalhou. Deixa eu ver até sobre isso. Steve Jobs. Era uma plataforma do criador da Apple, né? Depois que ele saiu da Apple em 1985. Então é muito interessante aí, como de uma certa forma o Romero ele começa a programar no Apple II e volta para as plataformas de Steve Jobs no Next. O John Romero ele é bem sintonizado com essa coisa do Vale do Silício, né? E ele também tem um orgulho da ancestralidade dele indígena, o que é muito bacana, o que torna ele um cara progressista hoje em dia. Ele não virou um débil mental extremista de direita que gosta de armas. Ele é um cara crítico sobre as próprias criações dele.
Eventually turned into OS X, OS X. This also meant that one of our core principles was upheld. Great tools help make great games. We could make far better tools on Next Step. So DoomEd and QuakeEd were two of the most important tools that we used. They both really helped us create levels and test them very quickly. You might not have known this, but we had 5 people on our team creating Doom. After Tom Hall left,
só 5 pessoas fazendo o jogo Doom.
We hired Sandy Peterson and Dave Taylor, which brought us up to 6
no lugar
people.
de Tom Hall.
We also did the Super Nintendo port of Wolfenstein 3D right in the middle of Doom's development. It took
Fizeram o Wolfenstein 3D o port para Super Nintendo no meio do desenvolvimento de Doom.
us 3 weeks to make this port because we had to learn the Super Nintendo hardware. So we uploaded the shareware version of Doom to the University of Wisconsin server on December 10th of 1993. The excitement for the game was unprecedented. People were sitting on the server in the upload directory, creating files with sentences like, "When will we see Doom?" And we got random calls in the office asking when it would be out. So time for a quick story. During the final day of Doom's creation, we worked 30 hours that day. So we had the game running on all the computers in the office to ensure that the game was really solid. So on a couple computers, the game froze. The menu could be brought up, but the gameplay it just stopped. So John Carmack thought about what could possibly be happening in the game, and he figured out the solution without actually doing any debugging. So he was correcting his solution, and we finally uploaded it after this 5-minute fix and more testing. So at the beginning of 1994, I started working with Raven Software and developed Heretic using the Doom engine. I wanted to see how an inventory system in a medieval version of Doom would play. It turned out great, I think. Does anyone remember Heretic? Okay, made it. Yeah. We also made Doom 2 in 1994, over 8 months, and it was released October 10th. In addition to this, we did the Jaguar port ourselves, and again, we were multitasking and making multiple games. So we made 2 games in 1993, 3 games in 1994. In 1995, we started working on Quake, and we got up to 9 developers. There were 4 designers, 3 coders, 2 artists, and I was the only one to actually do both coding and design. I wrote Quake Ed. I experimented with level design in full 3D. Again, we started with a clean code base. We had no code from Doom using Quake, which was another one of our core principles of development up to that time. Write your code for this game only, not for some future game. You're going to be writing new code later because you're going to be smarter.
Uma coisa muito interessante, ele recomenda que cada jogo que você faça um código único. Eles reaproveitaram o que eles haviam criado em Doom para fazer o Quake, e a coisa não deu muito certo. Não foi uma estratégia muito inteligente, mas é fruto daquele pensamento que ele falou que a id Software tinha no começo, que é um pensamento mais simplificador. É muito interessante essa palestra, gente. Palestra da GDC de 2016, só para a galera saber aqui, ó. 2016 lá na Europa.
Also, you're not tying yourself down to the limitations of your past code. Always try new things. So Quake's engine was being developed by John Carmack, and the rasterization was being developed by Michael Abrash. John Cash worked on the network code, and he went on to become the lead programmer of World of Warcraft. Time for another quick story. So this relates back to our belief that developing in a superior operating system can result in a better game. So while making Quake, we actually had a deal with Cray supercomputers to buy a Cray YMP for half price. So our plan was to have our development team connected to this Cray to BSP and LiDAR maps at supercomputer speeds, as well as crunch whatever kinds of new data that we thought that we might need for our next games engine. So the computer room in Quake's DM3 level was going to be full of Cray computers as a reference to this new hardware that we're going to acquire. Unfortunately, Cray was bought by Silicon Graphics before Quake was done, and that deal fell apart. So the computer room in Quake is filled with the usual rectangular mainframes instead of C-shaped Cray supercomputers. After publishing Heretic, I started working with Raven on Hexen. I wanted to see how an FPS would play with a hub level system and character classes on it. Hexen launched on October 30th of 1995 during the Deathmatch 95 event that was happening at Microsoft headquarters in Redmond. So a month later, I got Raven started on my next design, which was Hecatome. It would be the 3rd game in the series, Heretic, Hexen, and Hecatome. Hecatome was never finished. It was turned into Hexen 2 because I left it. During this time,
Esses daí são os jogos do final da id Software, viu, gente? O Quake, ele traz uma crise aí na vida do Romero.
We noticed a small game company making some nice games like Raptor, Call of the Shadows, and we brought them down from Illinois to make a game that we would publish. They called themselves Rogue Entertainment, and about 14 months later, they released Strife, which used the Doom engine. It was an FPS RPG, and it was really...
Olha aí, tempo do World of Warcraft foi desenvolvido jogos de tiro com temática de RPG. É muito bacana isso aqui. Vamos ouvir um pouquinho, gente. Daqui a pouco eu faço meus comentários.
fun, and it showed the combining genre.
E é muito importante vocês conhecerem todos esses conteúdos, gente. Lembrando que o Drops de Jogos tem aqui um crowdfunding no padrim.com.br e que você pode se inscrever aqui no canal gratuitamente e ativar o sininho para você receber todas as informações.
Could actually make a fun FPS. Has anyone played Strife here? All right. It's on Steam, by the way. Also, during 1995, we made Ultimate Doom, which was a retail version of the full version of Doom with an extra episode. And we made the master levels of Doom that year as well. So id Software was still 9 developers in size, and we released 2 games in 1995 while we were working on Quake. So work continued on Quake, and 14 months after we started, we released Q-Test on February 24th of 1996 for the world to test our first internet gameplay. During the next 4 months, we worked very hard to complete Quake. We also released Final Doom, which was created by Team TNT and the Casali brothers. And we also released Death Kings of the Dark Citadel, which was an additional set of levels for Hexen. So one important principle that helped us get Quake done faster was this one: encapsulate functionality to ensure design consistency. Examples of this in Quake would be like just the torches on the wall. We could have had us level designers place a torch model, then a fire model that animated, then a torch sound entity, all at the same location in a map. But then if we needed to move things around, something could have gotten left behind. So it was far easier to just create a torch entity that we dropped in the game with all the functionality built in and spawned by the engine. So also the water in the game needed sound effect entities all over the place to fully cover the water areas so you'd hear it everywhere. So if the water got modified in the level, moving all those entities around and deleting some, it would have been a huge mess. So it was easier to make the game just play water sound when the water was being rendered. So it was a renderer level feature, and it was out of the designer's hands, and that ensured consistency and it saved memory. And we did the same thing for the skies in Quake, Sky Audio. So I released Quake shareware on June 22nd at 5:30 Central Time on the University of Wisconsin at Madison site. So quick story. While Michael Abrash was programming the renderer, he was interleaving CPU instructions with FPU instructions to calculate perspective correct texture mapping. So sometimes while he was playing the game, for one frame, the game would show a completely different part of the level. He isolated the only instruction where that result could actually happen and determined that it was impossible for it to be an invalid value. So he had a friend from Intel come over and go through his analysis, and his friend agreed with him and told him that there was a known error with the floating point divide instruction on the Pentium, and it was a hardware error. So there was nothing that we could do about it, so we left it alone. But this bug is known as the Pentium FDiv bug, which you can look up online. So Quake is the game that introduced the world to mouse look, to high-speed true 3D worlds that are texture mapped, and internet multiplayer. So clans sprung up immediately as soon as the game came out, and esports and tournaments were starting all over the place. Quake World launched 5 months later to smooth out the internet gameplay. So making games was and still is our life. We love it more than anything else, as you can tell by our release of 28 games in 5.5 years by less than 10 people. Many other games were released that used our license technology over the years, and here are some more core principles that we learned from doing all of this work. Try to code transparently. Tell your lead and peers exactly how you're going to solve your current task and get feedback and advice. Don't treat game programming like each coder is a black box. Project could just totally go off the rails and cause delays. Programming is a creative art form based in logic. Every programmer is different and will code differently. Don't waste time focusing on a rigid coding style. It's the output that matters. So we keep working to make great games. It's in our blood as it's in your blood.
Uma coisa muito interessante que ele fala é sobre a originalidade de cada programador, né? Eu sou formado em filosofia e quando ele fala da lógica, a lógica não é necessariamente o racional, mas ela é um conjunto de ações que fazem sentido na cabeça de determinado indivíduo ou de determinado pensamento. Então, o que ele falou da personalidade na programação. Tem gente que escreve códigos de uma forma e tem pessoas que intuitivamente fazem de uma forma diferente e colhem resultados, inclusive, muito diferentes.
And it's why you're here at GDC. So you want to be the best, go be the best. Thank you for your time, and I'm ready for any kind of questions you might have. Thanks.
Aí a parte das perguntas, gente. Ele contou aí rapidamente a história da id Software. Ele não fala tanto da Ion Storm, né, que é o responsável pelo jogo Daikatana, que foi um grande fiasco, um jogo que vendeu cerca de 41 mil cópias para quem tinha feito 10 milhões com Doom, que foi o alcance dele quando ele revolucionou os jogos de computador. O Daikatana realmente foi uma coisa que ele ficou um tempo aí sem falar, mas que agora ele vai retomar na autobiografia dele, que chega em julho, gente. Leiam a matéria do Drops de Jogos para entender mais.
So yeah, I don't know if someone's handing a mic around or if anyone has any questions about this stuff. Okay, got one. All right, who wants to ask some questions first? Or does nobody want to ask a question? Oh, got one right over here.
Hey, great talk.
Thank you.
In one of the first principles you showed, you mentioned that don't prototype. And today, one of the main principles in our game production, as we learn, as we work, we are prototyping. What's your opinion on that?
Well, we because of the time pressures, we had no time to do prototypes, and we were a small company that only had 4 people at the time, so we could actually we didn't need to prototype because we knew from our 10 years of experience that the games that we were making were small in scope. They were very easy to visualize in our minds, and that when we started it and we finished it, say 1 or 2 months later, it was what needed to be done in that amount of time. So, you know, there may be 20 levels in the game, and it might end up being 10 levels. You know, it's like whatever would fit in that time, but all the gameplay and most of the characters and AI and all that stuff could totally get done in that space.
Porque ele fala que não pode prototipar tantos jogos, gente, por uma questão de limite de tempo e limite de equipe. Ele fala do escopo menor, justamente para você entregar o jogo no final. É uma dica que todo mundo que está nas faculdades de desenvolvimento recebe, que é justamente termine o seu jogo. O seu jogo pode estar ruim, mas termine ele para você ter realmente esse exemplo passado.
But I think nowadays, obviously, with any really big project, you're definitely going to be prototyping. But if you're still like a lot of mobile games, they might not need prototyping if you already know exactly how the game is going to play. But if you don't know, if you're developing your game kind of organically and you want to see where the game goes, I don't know if I would call it prototyping. I mean, it's like if you start making your game and at some point you might discover something about it that changes what you're doing in the game, but that's your game. It's a prototype if you're throwing it all away and starting over. But if you're still going forward, I don't know if that's a prototype. I think that's just the beginning of your game.
Thank you.
All right.
Perguntas aí vão rolar, gente. Bastante interessante. E curtam o vídeo, compartilhem. Vamos lá.
I always felt, especially looking back on Doom and Quake, that the music in your games was always a big part of the games. For example, I often listen to the Doom soundtrack, and I was just wondering, for example, the collaboration with Trent Reznor on Quake. How did that happen? Maybe you got another quick story.
O artista Trent Reznor, que já era fã dos desenvolvedores de Doom, ele participou de Quake.
That you could share.
Yeah, so the story with how we got Trent Reznor involved in Quake was kind of funny. After Doom, it hit everybody. Doom was such a big game that Hollywood started to they tried to get into games. So they knew like there had been an earlier Hollywood invasion of the game industry and they were rejected. And they decided to go in a different way. So we were contacted by Hollywood agents, ICM, and we had a person handling our account there named Bill Block. And Bill Block at that time had a lot of other...
O agente Bill Block, que cuidava o empresário que cuidava da conta deles do Doom, realmente fez essa aproximação do Trent Reznor, que é um compositor. O Trent Reznor, deixa eu só pegar aqui para vocês. Ele é músico de Newcastle, na Pensilvânia, e ele fez aí parte do Nine Inch Nails. Ele é fanzaço dele.
Clients, and one of which was Nine Inch Nails. Well, Nine Inch Nails, they played Doom all the time on the tour bus. They had 4 computers all networked on the tour bus. When they were done with their concerts, they were on the tour bus deathmatching. and they did it all the time. It's funny because I just spoke to someone like 2 weeks ago about that. Like they were interviewing Chris Verena and getting all this like, oh, we played Doom all the time stories. And so Bill found out about that and he said, hey, they're clients of mine. And we heard that they were clients, and we said, wow, it would be really cool if they would do the soundtrack for the next game. Instead of having MIDI kind of metal soundtrack, we could actually get some industrial real music in here. So so basically they agreed that they agreed to meet up with us, and they came over to our office in Mesquite. You know, Trent would pull up in a limo, and I don't know how, but there'd be a bunch of women outside the building waiting. They don't tell them anybody that they're going there, but they find out where he's going, and so they just wait outside while he's up there, and we're talking about stuff, you know, about the games and the kind of music that we're thinking about doing, and we hung out several times and just kind of kept in touch through email. And American McGee would fly to New Orleans where Trent lived, and just basically kind of coordinate the music creation. And it was kind of funny because Quake was delayed because of the music. Because if you involve like someone like Trent, who's like out on tour all the time and has a ton of rights around the music, there were 12 signatures we had to get from Interscope to actually get that music released to us. So it took us extra time, and finally, as soon as it was signed off, then we could actually release the game. So just watch out for that.
Thank you.
Ó, as perguntas rolando, gente. Essa transmissão aí do Romero é bem bacana.
Okay.
É importante também recuperar eventos.
So you had a rule stating that you didn't want to reuse code because you would not get the results that you wanted. At what level did you decide between using engine code and specific game code? Because you use Commander Keen, the engine code, several times over. At what level do you make that decision, and how?
Well, the Commander Keen code, let's say for Commander Keen 1 through 3, it was the same engine. So it ran the data that we created. So we created levels and characters and audio and all that. And that was just data the engine worked on. And the engine itself had if-defs basically in it for each of the Commander Keens back then. So if this is Keen 1, then these actors would be, you know, their code would be, would be running. And we would load these files. So there were if-defs in the engine just to handle the specific sets of data or sets of code that were different for the different. We just didn't want the executable to be full of 3 games worth of specialized information, so we if-def'd some of it. But to keep things really small on a disk, we had to take like generic data files and turn them into object files, and then link them into our executable, and then compress the executable, because we had to fit on a 140 or a 3. What was it back then? It was a 1.44 3.5 inch disk. So we had to. We did need to do that where we didn't keep all of our code in one big executable, but it was if-def'd out. So in the code it was there, but not in the executable. But what I was talking about was when we went between major jumps like Keen 1 through 3 to Keen 4 through 6, those engines have no shared code in them, or Wolfenstein, or Doom, or Quake. It's basically start with a new code base, and that was actually back in the 80s. That was pretty typical. Like if you look at the Ultima games, like Lord British's Ultima games, every one of them was just brand new code. Just start writing a new game. And maybe there's a faster way to render tiles on the screen, or use code paging where you're overwriting code in memory because the game's too big, etc. So yeah, we didn't reuse code unless it was something that it was very small and it didn't matter, like loading a file. But usually it's so small that we probably just type it ourselves again.
Muito bom. Olha aí, mais uma pergunta aí pro Romero lá no GDC.
All right.
O pessoal fica meio intimidado, né, de fazer perguntas para ele.
Now, obviously, you were working on porting across Super Mario Bros. 3 during the 80s, early 90s. Why do you think side-scrollers, even though they were really popular during that era, even though they've fallen out of favor now, why do you think, as pioneer of the first-person shooter genre, why do you think the genre has gone from strength to strength to strength to strength and there are no signs of it like going down in terms of popularity?
You mean the shooter genre?
Yeah, the first-person shooter genre that ultimately ID pioneered back in the day.
Well,
Pedi para ele comentar por que os jogos de tiro hoje em dia não tem nada a ver com aquele espírito quase que revolucionário da ID Software nos anos 90, que era subverter mesmo os jogos. Hoje em dia você tem um padrãozinho que é o Call of Duty, né?
well, the great thing about the shooter genre is that it started to fragment its design across different styles. So when we were making our games, like we just made this one type of game, which I mean, I'd say Wolfenstein and Doom and Quake are very similar in that you go through levels and you just like kill monsters and get to the exit, and it just looked better each time, and things acted differently and sounded better at all and looked better. But you know, as soon as other people started to get into making shooters, then we started to see people needing to be like more creative because they're not the only game in town. You know, now there's a bunch of people making them. So if you look at, say, the Red Storm games, when they started coming out with Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, and Splinter Cell, that was basically saying, here's a whole tactical section of the shooter genre where you're creeping along, you're getting to do really long distance sniper rifle shots, and so Call of Duty, where you have checkpoints and everything advances between checkpoints. So people started to really try and innovate within the genre, and now you have, you know, Overwatch, you know, TF2 and Lawbreakers in this whole competitive way of playing shooters. And I know that we have, let's say, an MMO shooter, Destiny. So everybody's taken this viewpoint and this way of basically shooting stuff and applying it to a lot of different ways of getting through, you know, or getting through objectives, basically, and wrapping some kind of narrative around it that's really different. And sometimes you get something that's, you know, very different, like Splinter Cell is pretty different from those other games, but you're still shooting in some parts. So I think it's just because there's so much competition, people are trying to do something new with it. If you have, I don't know, has anyone played the Hitman Sniper game on mobile? Because that's another really cool way of making a shooter where you just have a vantage point somewhere on your mobile phone and you're just zooming into a scene and scrolling across the scene and tracking people, and it's totally a first-person shooter, but you don't move. And it's just another way, just another example of how people are trying to innovate and push forward with this first-person shooter perspective, but how you play it is different. And I know that the innovation is just going to continue. You know, people are just going to continue trying to innovate with that viewpoint, and what else can you do with it?
Ele fala que o principal trunfo de Doom foi justamente ter fragmentado e criado vários outros estilos. Ele descreve, é muito engraçado, Destiny 2 e Destiny como um MMORPG de jogos de tiro. O Overwatch com a sua diversidade. Ele descreve a questão dos checkpoints e da jogabilidade mais acessível do Call of Duty. É muito legal, gente, a gente ver essas palestras nesses grandes eventos que muitas vezes passam batida, porque o mercado ele funciona muito nessa coisa dos lançamentos, dos anúncios, do que é comercial, e olhar um pouco para esses ícones do nosso mercado e entender um pouco como é que funciona o raciocínio dele. O John Romero é um cara que ele transmite, pelo menos para as pessoas que acompanham ele, e na leitura do livro Masters of Doom, de ser um cara muito artístico, muito pessoal, ele gosta de easter eggs, ele gosta realmente disso, mas você vê, quando ele fala para desenvolvedores, ele fala sobre a necessidade de simplicidade. Ele é um cara que tem uma interlocução muito boa com o mercado independente, gente, que foi uma coisa até que me surpreendeu na pergunta que eu fiz sobre o Scorn para ele e sobre jogos indie. Ele chama o independente, ele chama a pequena produção, que no fundo foi o que formou ele, da alma do nosso mercado. As grandes produções, elas são exceções, na verdade, elas são que aí acaba virando motivo de exploração da própria indústria, e não tem nada a ver necessariamente com você ter uma relação mais sadia e mais artística e mais cultural com os próprios videogames. Vamos continuar acompanhando. Mais uma pergunta que está vindo aí.
So your story has been very inspirational
É uma palestra que virou meio coletiva, né? Muito bacana.
to many many people in the industry. And what do you think was unique to id Software in those days that enabled this to happen? And do you think it can happen again to teams these days? And what would be your advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super common, and really everybody can do the same thing. And what it comes down to is people that match pretty well, having a pretty good amount of experience, but really having focus and determination to make your game and finish your game, and do that over and over.
Mais uma vez o conselho, termine o seu jogo, termine o seu jogo. Você tá vendo, não é o Pedro Zambarda, vocês estão vendo o John Romero, que é o John Romero falando, termine, desenvolvedor, o seu jogo. É muito necessário isso.
Over again. So when Wolfenstein came out, that was game number 87 for me, and Doom was like game number 90.
Ó, o Wolfenstein foi o jogo número 87 e o Doom foi o número 90. Então ele fez quase 100 jogos até realmente chegar no sucesso.
And we had made so many games, and we had iterated, and we have shipped over and over, that we knew how to do it, and we didn't have to really worry about how to finish a game or even how to start a game. We were just worried about how to design a really good game and to create new technology and kind of make those things work together. Nowadays, you don't really have to worry so much about the tech, and it really is all about, design is law. It's all about what is that design that you're doing, that you're creating, that no one has seen before, because the tech is already there for you to use. Except for when you're in VR and AR, and there's a lot of new stuff that you're going to create there. But traditionally on console and PC, what is the design? And can you focus and spend a lot of time on that, innovative, unique design to make something people haven't seen before? The engine's already out there. If you look at Minecraft, it's a perfect example of, here's an amazing design that one person created, and it was all about what you do in this simple world. People, it's easy to complexify a design. That takes nothing to make something really complex. It's hard to simplify everything. And if you just sit there and spend time simplifying your design, taking away things from your UI and things that would just complicate what you're doing and try and make it contextual within the game, then you're getting better and better at what you do. And so I say everybody has the same chance to do it. It's just, it takes, not really a team, but it's helpful if you have a team, and it just takes focus and determination. And I think for us, it was us being in the same room and being co-located. Over the internet, it's a lot harder.
Olha lá, mais perguntas chegando aí, o John Romero, grande desenvolvedor de jogos, que é muito necessário para vocês entenderem.
Given that you didn't make prototypes and you made so many games, were there any concepts that you had to walk away from or throw away?
Let me see. If we, yeah, we did. So after we made our first Commander King games, we were going to make a game called Quake, The Fight for
Commander King, para quem não sabe, é o jogo que uniu todos eles lá na id Software.
Justice. And it was going to be an RPG and everything. So we started working on it, and we worked on it for about 2 weeks. And then we decided, we knew that Quake was supposed to be a really great game. It's supposed to look great. It's supposed to be a powerful game, and that what we were making right after Commander King was not matching that idea of who Quake was in our minds, that from D&D. So we basically said, forget it. We're still making these simple kind of cartoony games. Let's just keep on getting better at it, but we're going to put Quake off. And so that was like early 1991. So we waited 4 years before we actually got the tech together and what we knew we could deliver on the original promise or design of Quake in 1995 when we started working on Quake. Other than that, we didn't really start on any game that we didn't finish. It was we talked about games and talked about ideas, such as when we finished Catacomb 3D and we were planning on making the next set of Commander Keens, Keen 7 through 9, we decided that, you know what, let's not do this side-scrolling thing again. I mean, we can do maybe a Keen someday in the future, but maybe it'll be in 3D, but let's start doing 3D stuff. Like, we just made Catacombs 3D, which was really like one of the first texture-mapped games, even though it was an EGA. So Tom Hall thought of this idea where, what if there's a research facility and there's mutants all over the place because they created these monsters and they're destroying all the scientists, and you're gonna go in and rescue them all. And I just told them that's an awful idea. I don't want to play that game already. And so I said, why don't we just remake Wolfenstein, Castle Wolfenstein? And we all just immediately went, oh my God, let's do that. So that original idea, that was just another idea that we had that we didn't do. But that's like pretty much the only extent that we had back then of not making something. We kind of knew what we were going to make, and we just made them. So there wasn't a let's start Doom and then reboot or something like that. We just made the games. We just came up with the designs and made them.
Muito bacana. Mais uma pergunta aí.
Hello. My question is, you managed to make games so quickly, so very, very quickly. How did you do it, and what happened afterwards? Because I think it became a little bit slower.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. A lot of new programmers don't fully understand what we had to do back then because there's so many APIs nowadays that do everything for you. So let's pretend that in a world where there are no APIs, because that's what we lived in. There were no APIs when we were making our stuff. There was...
Ele pensa que é o seguinte, na época que ele desenvolvia não existiam tantos recursos técnicos, APIs e formas de você cortar caminho para você criar vários jogos. Então eles tinham que criar vários até que um desse certo, que é a pergunta que o rapaz fez ali. Como é que você desenvolveu tanto, mesmo sem ter certeza aí do seu êxito?
BIOS. You know, the thing that when you boot your PC and you see some of that text that you should never see ever again, like that's your BIOS. And that's the only thing that we could actually talk to through the simple interrupt21 assembly language API. That was it. So putting pixels on the screen for us was, we knew where in the computer's memory, if we put a value in memory, a dot would show up. And so that's how we put our graphics on the screen. We actually had to write all the code in assembly to put the dots on the screen quickly so you'd see a shape and backgrounds and everything. There was no API to send a display list of triangles to a GPU or anything, because it didn't even exist. So while making Quake, if you can just imagine a full 3D world, everything that those video cards were doing, we actually had to do that in our own code. And we knew that when we were developing those APIs, that when we were developing the code to rasterize Quake, we were also working with NVIDIA on the pipeline that we wanted the cards to be using, which are the APIs that turned into the on-card APIs that DirectX and OpenGL and stuff talk to. But we had to put every pixel on the screen ourselves. We had to read the keyboard ourselves. There was no nice functions to call to do stuff like that. And that is just to get the tech working, not to mention drawing characters, in 2D. So 2D keyframe animation, everyone knows how long that takes. There was no tweening. There was no 3D stuff. So it took us it sounds like it did take us a long time, but we spent all of our hours working. So especially when we were in Madison, Wisconsin, why would we go outside? There's no reason to even go out. We could order pizza and live inside of one room. So that's what we did. And so we basically slept for 8 hours, and all the rest of the time we worked for, half a year while we were doing that, which got, several games done at that point. But really, it was all about, we didn't have anything else going on. There was no Twitter, no Facebook, no internet, no nothing. So nothing is popping up and bugging us. So we could just sit there and code all day long listening to heavy metal and stuff. So that's what we did. There were no interruptions. And it was...
Olha ele falando da cultura de ouvir heavy metal. Quem não lembra, tá lá no documentário do Jogabilidade sobre o John Romero, era a época do grunge. O grunge é a fusão do metal com o punk. E o John Romero é esse cara que era do heavy metal. Vamos continuar ouvindo mais um pouquinho.
It was all about time, focus, and determination.
Olha aí mais uma pergunta.
Okay. Since you left ID Software, Doom 3 came out, and Doom 2016 came out only recently. Doom 3 was criticized by some people for the fact that it focused too much on survival horror, whereas Doom 2016 has been criticized, even though a lot of early Doom fans have praised it for the fact that it's gone back to basics formula. A lot of people have also stated that it hasn't taken into account the genre innovations that have occurred since Doom 2. If you were to be, say, like in an alternative universe, if you could have had a hand in the making of Doom 3 and 2016, how would you have done Doom?
What I've done for Doom 3 or Doom 4? Well,
John Romero não fez Doom 3, tá, gente? Isso virou até meme na internet. Ele já estava fora da id Software porque eles brigaram por conta de Quake. E Quake ficou mais na mão do John Carmack, que é essa cabeça. O John Carmack é um cara viciado em ciência, muito mais racional do que o John Romero, e tem esse lado de arte um pouco menos aguçado.
I would have made a sequel, I think. I would have made a sequel to Doom 2. Because Doom 3 and Doom 4 were reboots of the original Doom in different ways. So it would have been a sequel.
Ele explica que Doom 3 e Doom 4 são reboots do Doom original. É diferente do que ele tinha imaginado, que ele pensou numa sequência.
I can't say what that sequel would have been because I never thought about like making a sequel to Doom 2. If you look at the games that we had made back then, we made a game and sometimes we made a sequel to the game. Like Wolfenstein, we did a sequel, kind of prequel, but then we did Spear of Destiny. We did Doom, Doom 2, Quake, and I started designing Quake 2 before I left. But it was always main shareware game, retail game, main shareware game, retail game, invent new IP, invent new IP, invent new IP. So we probably wouldn't have done that if I was there because we needed to create new franchises. That was more interesting than living inside of a franchise for a long period of time, since if it was a game that was a service-based game that was operational every day, yes, I could live inside of that for a long time, but we weren't making those back then, and probably I wouldn't have personally wanted to make a Doom 3 back then. That's why we made Quake. And so after Quake 2, if I was still there, we would have done a totally different game.
Olha lá, ele tretou por conta de Quake 2 e Quake 1 já tinha um certo atrito dentro da id Software.
So I guess the answer is I
Uma
wouldn't
coisa
have done
de
it.
briga de banda de rock, né? Cada um foi para um lado.
All right. 6 more minutes.
And
Okay.
excuse me for my a bit stupid question, but I play games today now. And what's your favorite title or genre of video games now? If it's not a secret.
Oh, say that again. I couldn't understand that.
What's your favorite genre of the video games now today?
What's my favorite game or genre?
Yes.
Aí ele fala um pouquinho dos jogos favoritos dele, vamos ver juntos.
Oh, wow.
And
Favorite genre? Well, I kind of like FPSs. That's kind of obvious. I'm also love MMOs. People don't know this, but
Ele gosta muito de World of Warcraft, gente. Ele gosta muito de Activision Blizzard, e foi uma pergunta que eu fiz para ele. Ele gosta muito de World of Warcraft ser um jogo, um RPG, MMORPG, para quem não sabe, é Massive Multiplayer Role Playing Game. São os RPGs que são jogados por 100, 200, 300 mil pessoas online no mundo, assim como o Second Life e assim como vários outros jogos. Ele é fissurado por isso. E ele gosta muito de cultura medieval, desde quando os RPGs instigaram, inclusive, eles a criarem Doom.
worked on an MMO for 4 years. Has anyone heard of Gazillion Entertainment? So Gazillion is an MMO company that I founded with 2 other people in 2005, and we worked on. I worked on an MMO that I designed for 4 years before we had to stop working on the game. But during that time, I played World of Warcraft every single day for 5 years, 6 hours minimum, 12 hours minimum on weekends.
Jogou World of Warcraft por 5 anos, 6 horas no mínimo e 12 horas no máximo, no mínimo pelos finais de semana. Ele jogou muito World of Warcraft. O jogo que eu mais joguei foi uma save de Pokémon Gold que eu tive 600 horas. E acho que Pokémon, vários, acho que devo reunir aí umas 2.000, 2.500 horas.
So I have thousands of hours in WoW. So I love MMOs. So we got 5 minutes.
Última pergunta.
So when you did your original games, we didn't really have the internet as we know it today, and we didn't have the feedback cycles on, for instance, bugs as we have today. We've also gotten more advanced in our engines, so it's easier to create bugs. How has that influenced game design and the creative process? And do you think that's Do you think it's a benefit, or do you think it as a bad thing?
Well, yeah, back then, the only feedback cycles that I had back then was when I tried to get something published. So I would have to send my games through the mail, like paper mail, with a disc in an envelope. And then the editor at a magazine, back when...
Aqui ele mandava os jogos por e-mail, tá? Ele mandava pelo correio. Esse é o mail que ele está falando.
People, for some reason, typed games in from magazines in the computer. So I published a bunch of games like that. And the editors would get the manuscript, they get the disc, and the big, huge... and the big, huge listing, assembly language listing or whatever. And they would see that, they would review it, and they would send back, pages of little tweaks here and there. Some of them were in the game, most of them were in the text of the manuscript, and that was helpful because they were usually really good suggestions. And as we kind of got into the age where people could just like get online and start posting feedback, and we actually had beta testers who would send our discs in the mail to in the early 90s, and really good feedback because they would find some bugs in our games that we couldn't, that were not obviously crash bugs or anything, just weird, obscure little things. And so that was helpful. And then when we actually get to the point where we're on the internet, people are just coming up with really good ideas. And you have to like obviously take everything with a grain of salt, and you can't read the comments and all that. You have to, as a game developer, you trust yourself, you trust your design. And you just kind of have to believe that you're making something that you like, and but you do have to listen to criticism because sometimes people have a lot of really good stuff to say. So I think nowadays it's gotten better. Games are getting better. There's a lot of good feedback out there if you listen to it. And sometimes the players can be a really good part of the process of defining where the games are going, as you can kind of see with the way Kickstarter works. There's a lot of feedback going into Kickstarter campaigns and people going forward. I think we'll just do this one more.
Mais uma pergunta liberou ainda. É muito legal, ele é muito acessível, gente. Tanto que conversou com a gente.
Yeah, I'm just starting out with programming, like 2 years, and I'm starting older than you, so this is kind of like a philosophical question more.
Cara, é mais velho do que eu.
How did you, when you started learning to program, avoid burnouts, or did you just program and you just had fun at it? Or?
There was no burnout.
Olha aí, ele faz uma pergunta muito importante aqui. O burnout e o crunch, que são quando o trabalhador é mega explorado dentro da indústria de games, é algo que existe. Agora, não podemos ser ingênuos. O John Romero, como sendo um ícone dessa indústria, ele não fala tanto sobre isso, porque ele é um dos caras que foi principalmente muito beneficiado por essa indústria. Mas vamos ver o que ele responde aqui. Eu não acho que ele é um hipócrita, mas estou dizendo de qual lugar ele fala. Ele é o cara que deu certo depois de muitas tentativas. Ele fala que não teve burnout.
I couldn't wait, like in the summer times when I was going to school, or when I wasn't going to school, like get out of high school ends, and then it's like at 8 o'clock I could wake up and I could code until 2 or 3 in the morning. I couldn't wait to do that. I actually used to get mad that I had to go to the bathroom. So there was no burnout because I was so excited that every time, the kind of programming that I like to do is I like to see results all the time. I don't like to build a giant chunk of something that hopefully will be cool at some point and I'll see it. I like to see stuff as much as possible. So my iteration time is just usually a couple lines of code before I look at it again. I run my code over and over, like thousands and thousands of times. I'll write a couple lines. I want to see how it works. So I know that what I wrote is not going to turn into this big, huge problem later. And so I'm always working on getting cool stuff up on the screen. So I'm always excited the whole time I'm making something. So burnout is maybe, you need to get outside and eat and, and see something other than the computer screen. But anyway, I don't burn out that much.
I think I'm the last question.
Okay, yeah, that was the last question.
Agora é a última da última. Essa resposta dele é meio problemática, né, gente? Burnout existe, é um problema muito sério e não é você sair para refrescar a cabeça, não é porque você é fanático por programar. Eu sou um apaixonado e um obsessivo pelo jornalismo. E eu preciso de períodos de descanso, eu preciso de períodos em que eu faça viagens, eu preciso de férias. Os trabalhadores têm que brigar por direitos mínimos, gente. Então a gente sabe que nesse ponto o Romero não é tão progressista assim e ele mostra bem que ele é um cara da indústria.
All right, that was the last question, I believe. So thanks everybody.
Aquela foi a última pergunta.
For listening to the story.
É isso, gente. Esse foi a palestra do Romero na GDC da Europa. E é muito bacana. Eu vou começar a fazer isso, gente, até para eu recuperar alguns arquivos de algumas palestras. É um formato que eu gosto bastante, eu gosto de assistir vídeos. E aí eu gosto ainda mais quando eu posso sentar e comentar um vídeo desses com vocês. Hoje eu me estendi um pouco porque eu posso me estender. Quando eu não puder me estender, eu faço um react num vídeo, numa live, e aí na outra eu finalizo aqui esse meu trabalho com vocês. Muito obrigado a todo mundo que acompanhou, o pessoal da comunidade dos indies. A gente vai continuar cobrindo todos os principais fatos. Vida longa e próspera, gente. Boa tarde para todo mundo. Bom cafezinho da tarde para quem ainda não tomou café, gente. Até mais. Tchau, tchau. Opa, peraí. Falta apertar.